So hi, everybody. Welcome to our conversation today, where you're going to talk about how schools, institutions can help online and non-traditional students achieve some of the same opportunities that more traditional face-to-face students have a little bit by default, particularly when it comes to things like peer connection, sense of belonging, and social capital. We are recording this webinar, so we will send that out afterward. Feel free, obviously, to share it with anybody else. We also welcome your input. So if you have questions or anything, please post them to the webinar chat. One note is that when you first open the chat, it usually defaults to post just to the moderators. So you might want to change that setting just so the other participants in the webinar can learn from you and hear what you have to say. So my name is Katie Kapler. I am co-founder and CEO of InScribe, and we're going to talk a lot today about the InScribe virtual community platform. We're going to give you a bit of an overview of what we do, provide some examples of how some of our partners have leveraged this technology, and then do a quick demo just so you can see the product in action. I'm also joined today by my colleague, Danielle Bonner, who is going to keep an eye on the chat, make sure if any questions come in that we take care of those and address those during the conversation. She, as I usually say, she is fully empowered to interrupt me as I go. And then also on the call, I believe, is Fred Scott. Some of you may have heard from him, either met him previously at some of our events or heard from him in the lead up to this event. He'll be the one following up with you with all of the great content. So just want to make sure you get to put a face to the name. And we always like to know who we are talking to. So if you have a minute to just post into the chat, who you are, what your title is, maybe what institution or city you're coming from. And then if there's something specific that you want to see or learn today, this is a great opportunity to tell us, because we're going to cover a lot of stuff, a lot of information, and I can make sure that we touch specifically on that as part of the conversation. But we'd love for it to be an open dialogue, so please continue to post into the chat as we go along. We always start with this question in our webinars, partly just to sort of ground ourselves in the purpose of why we are having this discussion, or why we feel like this conversation is really important right now. And I'll say for about a year and a half, when I attend conferences, when I'm at events, I find that so many schools are coming to us and saying, for our online and non-traditional students, we aren't sure we're actually achieving the values of peer connection and belonging with those learners. We aren't really sure how to do it. We maybe have some ideas how to do it, but we aren't sure how to measure it. And then I think since AI has really come on the scene and started to take off, some of the sort of opportunities and concerns around that have gotten even larger. So we thought this is a great opportunity to come together and talk about specifically a technology that is really human first, human driven, and then what we call technology enabled. So how do we continue to put humans at the front of these experiences in a meaningful and scalable way so that we don't miss out on these opportunities for our learners? So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Danielle, is there anything in the chat you want me to touch on right away?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
For everyone attending, if you wouldn't mind just dropping any questions that you have in the chat, let us know where you're joining from. I know, Katie, you started off real hot and heavy there. You got right on into it. So if we have the opportunity and you're just joining us, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat.
I did the intro stuff quickly. I'm not usually very good at that. It takes me
Very impressed.
So just to start with a couple of definitions, put us all on the same page. You might have a different definition for some of this, which I welcome your input, or if you have suggestions or changes. But when we think about sense of belonging, it is really about students having what we call positive and purposeful connections. So the connections they have with other humans help them feel valued. They feel like they can really be themselves in this community, and what ideas and knowledge they bring to the table is really valued and accepted by that community. So we all know that having a strong sense of belonging is really critical to a student's ability to be successful. I'm sure we have all been in a room at some point where we felt like the odd person out, and the anxiety that comes with that, the sort of inability to speak up or raise your hand, can be kind of overwhelming. So imagine being a student, particularly a student learning at home, feeling that way. And then we have this expectation that that student is going to be an active participant and a super successful learner. So if we can really think about how to make them feel like part of the community, they will ultimately be more successful in their education journey. We are also, so sense of belonging is something that we have been thinking about and measuring and talking about with our partners for many years. We are also now really starting to think about what is sort of not the other side of that coin, but very closely related to that concept, which is something called social capital, which many of you are probably familiar with. Social capital is really about the networks and relationships that we build. And as a student, you are building those relationships with a whole bunch of people at the institution. So faculty and staff, the other students, and potentially alumni, or maybe even people in the business community that have some connection with your university or college. I also believe we can all reflect back on our education journey and how important those relationships probably were to you, both as a student and after you've graduated, and how the social capital that you build really has this long tail positive impact for our learners. The reality is when you're learning online and you don't have the sort of serendipitous opportunity to run into individuals to see them face to face, building these networks and relationships has to be much more purposeful. And we really believe that part of the institution's responsibility and opportunity is to create scenarios in which students can do that in a fairly simple and meaningful way. I will say, I think social capital is very difficult to measure. So it's one of the things that we're thinking about. If anybody has been studying this and has some ideas around that, please let us know. We'll touch on this a little bit, but know that it's something that we're starting to think about and think about how we measure with the partners that we work with. Probably don't need to tell anyone on the webinar today about this, but we really understand that post-secondary education is largely inhabited by students who are not 18 to 21, living on campus, taking a 4-year degree. They live in this non-traditional space. They have lots of other things that they're juggling, and very often they're learning in an isolated fashion. And so for all the reasons we've already talked about, that type of learning can be challenging for a number of reasons. You might come in, it's hard to stay motivated if you're learning by yourself. It's hard to build those relationships. Sometimes people come in with, maybe they had a previous bad experience coming back as more an adult learner. And so there's a little bit more imposter syndrome or sort of fear of failure that comes along for the ride. So these students need a little bit of different type of support and interaction. At the same time, because they are so busy, any support we provide has to be extremely flexible and extremely adaptable to really meet them where they are. So those are the fundamental things that we always believe when we're bringing technology into the mix to help these students. So that's really the basis for why we built InScribe. So InScribe, if you're not familiar, we're a virtual community platform. So we create these digital spaces where students at the institution can meet up with other students, potentially with faculty and staff at your school, with alumni, in a totally flexible on-demand space. So they can come in to seek advice, ask questions, or just share stories and build relationships with others. Our focus is always initially on how do we improve student outcomes and some of these measures of belonging and capital. But we also have a mindset to creating models that are efficient and cost-effective for our partners. So you can do all the great things in the world for your learners and help them succeed. But if it's going to cost you way too much time, money, and effort to make it unsustainable, it's not going to work. So think about these communities as a way to actually reduce your cost of support while providing all this value to your individual students. These are some of the outcomes that we see. So right today, what we're really going to focus on is what we'll call a peer community. So it's designed to bring students at various levels, but often even at the institution level, together in a shared space where they can talk to and meet one another. We have other communities that institutions that use our community platform around academics and learning. So maybe there's a community around math or college algebra. There might be a community around English. So depending on the type of community, we're going to look at kind of different outcomes. And you'll see some of that here. So studies from our partners, which we'll share with you as part of this webinar or follow-up, include demonstrating that students participating in the community were twice as likely to persist. We actually just did another study that demonstrated a 15% increase in persistence rates term over term after the introduction of the community. We see DFW rates in the first year courses dropping dramatically. So, and this specifically, this 8.5% is related to math. So getting a huge number of additional students through that really difficult first year math class. And at the same time, reducing the cost of support. So the number of individual emails that you're getting, the number of phone calls that you're receiving, we can bring that number down and give you those hours back to do other kinds of activities, higher level interventions. So we talked about this already. Oh yeah, sorry.
Couple of questions coming into the chat.
Sorry, I need to take a break.
Elaborate. DFW, what does that mean?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. So DFW is getting a D or an F in a class or withdrawing. So it's essentially a student that was not able to successfully complete a class. So it's the inverse of students successfully passing a class.
Okay, next question. How does a peer-to-peer interaction compare to the interaction in a traditional Q&A LMS space? So thinking about those discussion boards, thinking about the Q&A that happens in the LMS, how is your digital communities different?
So that is a great question. I think part of that I'm going to answer when we open up the platform, because a lot of it is visual and the way that the content is organized and designed. But I'll give you sort of 3 high-level examples. One is that we actually hear from, especially if you're trying to build a community that is not specific to an individual classroom. If you want to build community above the classroom or across a larger group of students, it is very difficult to do that in the LMS. Part of that is because students are coming to the LMS to get their work done and then get out. They're not really thinking about it in that way. They also think about it as this academic space, not the space that I go to be social. And because it's a little bit tangential, meaning, it's a separate maybe class or something I have to log into, they often don't recognize or go back to it on a frequent basis. So that's kind of about access and participation. The other thing that we hear is, you'll see when I do the demo that our communities are very much designed to be a knowledge repository. So it's not just a transactional system where you're like, I ask a question, I get an answer, everybody moves on. If that conversation has taken place, we want to make sure that all the community members benefit from that conversation today or a week from now or a month from now. So it's very easy to navigate across conversations. You can search all of the content in the community. And it's not just this sort of running list or stream that we sometimes see either in a discussion board or in a more social media style platform. And then the last thing I will say is I think we've done a really nice job weaving more advanced technology into our communities to make them more scalable. So we'll talk in a minute about Rosie. She's our technology assistant that lives in the communities. And she kind of stays in the background, but keeps an eye on what's happening in the conversations. And she can proactively identify if there's a place where maybe a student's getting really upset or something's particularly on fire, and can alert the moderators to step in and prioritize that as something, which a traditional platform is never really going to give you that visibility.
Are students required to opt in, or does the institution just add all the students into the community?
It's totally up to you. So we consider best practices preloading your students into the community so they don't miss out, but you can have them enroll themselves if that's your preferred method.
Wonderful. Thank you for all your questions. Keep dropping them in the chat as Katie moves along.
Thank you. All right, so I feel like we covered all of this more than once. So I'm going to just tell you a couple of quick stories, and then we'll jump into the demo. So one of our favorite partners that we've been working with is Fort Hays State University. If you're not familiar, they're a public university in Kansas. You can see the number of colleges and majors they have. What's kind of unique about them is they actually have a larger online student body than in-person student body. So you can see there, and I think these numbers are even higher today. And the demographics of that online student are, by and large, in my 30s, more women than men, have children at home, and working full time. So sort of check all the boxes of the non-traditional students that we've talked about. And so one thing that happened at Fort Hays is during and after the pandemic, they were talking to their students about how the shift to online had impacted them. And all of their in-person students were saying, it was hard. I was so lonely. I had nobody to talk to. I felt unmotivated. And the online students were like, oh, it's kind of business as usual. And so Andrew Feldstein, who's our contact there, looked at that information and said, okay, on the one hand, I could be like, oh, great, online's fine. But actually what I see here is our online students have just gotten used to being lonely and alone and not connected to anybody. So it didn't even occur to them to be upset about it. So they made a conscious decision to start to build better opportunities for those learners to meet with each other and connect with each other. And what was born out of that is their virtual community, which they call Tiger to Tiger. It is designed by students for students. It is actually integrated into their Blackboard platform, but above the course level. So when you come in, the banner highlights the Tiger to Tiger community and the students can join in directly from there. And we've been doing this for about 2 years. He's done a number of studies, including one where the level of peer connection that students who are participating in the community had jumped significantly after they started participating in Tiger to Tiger. But for Andrew, I think the more meaningful outcomes that he's seen from this community are the individual interactions that he's seeing students have. A lot of it is what you'd expect. Does somebody know anything about this teacher? Or I need to get a textbook. But a lot of it also is much deeper and kind of gets to how these students are really thinking and feeling about their education journey. So this is one of our favorite posts. It happened very early in the adoption, but it's so powerful that we always talk about it. And one of their students came in and posted this, maybe I'm too old, and went on to describe how difficult the semester had been, how there's all this other stuff going on, and like, am I regretting that I made this decision to go back to school? And within an hour or two, there were 20 responses, everything from, I am feeling the same way. Oh my gosh, I was going to ask this question, but I was afraid to people jumping in to say, don't worry, we can do this. We're in it together. Let's form a study group. And what was awesome about that is if this student had gone to their advisor or their counselor and said the same thing, of course, they would get wonderful and supportive feedback. But there's something different about hearing that from your peer who is really experiencing the same thing as you. And if one of the students that was part of this conversation persisted, the value is there for everybody. You can also see here the number of views that were on this post. So it wasn't just the people participating that got to have the relationship with this conversation. It was also, and I believe this number's now up to like 500 students who saw it, maybe never said anything, but also thought, well, you know what, I was kind of feeling the same way and now I feel a little bit better about it. So that's kind of the social side of what we see in these spaces. The other partner I want to talk about is Rio Salado College. So if you're not familiar with them, they're a community college in Arizona. They started as a predominantly online school, so that's still part of their DNA, and they support over 55,000 students every year. Very high level. You can also see below that it's a very diverse student base. So they are designated as a Hispanic serving institution, but they also have lots of students of diverse backgrounds at the college. And then in terms of education intention there, what that means is 35% of the students that are at Rio are there for the 2-year degree, for the duration. 62% are what they call seeking supplemental education, which means I need to pick up 1 or 2 classes, 1 or 2 things as part of my journey. And what Rio thinks about here is this population of students can be really hard to reach. If they're transactional, if they're coming in and out, how do we make sure that they also feel connected and part of our institution? And so they partnered with us, and sort of in a similar vein to Fort Hays, they said, we want to create a space where our students can really come together and support one another. And they did it in this really cool way, which is they built Rio Connect. It's integrated into their LMS, and this is also a picture of the phone app that we built that they're leveraging extensively. And they tapped into their student leadership organization. So they said, come sit at the table with us, help us design this community so it's really meaningful for you. And then we would like you to be the people that run this community once we step away. And so that's what they've done. They've had thousands of students participating in the community month over month. And with them, we did a very like dedicated and specific research study in partnership with another organization. I'm sure Danielle will drop it in the chat. And in this research study, we measured two things: sense of belonging and peer connection. And one of the really cool things was, not only did students in the community report higher levels of belonging, increased levels of peer connection, there were actually two groups of students that reflected that. One is the group, and so we studied them, sorry, I should have mentioned, there's 2 points in time. So we talked to the students after about 2 weeks, and then we talked to them about 6 weeks. And so for the students that were already participating at 2 weeks and continued to participate at 6 weeks, we saw great feedback, great trajectory. But there was a population of students who at the 2-week mark had not participated in the community and only joined once we sort of reminded them that it was there. And what we saw in that population was at 2 weeks, they had measures of belonging and peer connection that were much lower than the active participants. But once we got to that 6-week mark, they had caught up to the people that had already been participating over that 6 weeks. So it doesn't take very long to bring students along for the ride. And we could see in real time the actual impact of participation for these learners. Did you drop the study in, Danielle?
Yes, I've dropped both the Fort Hayes study and the Rio Salado study.
Awesome. Okay, so any other questions I should address?
Not at this time.
Staying on track here. So just really quickly, because one of the main, I'm not really going to demo this today, but it is so critical to community success that I do want to talk about it, and that is access. So whether you adopt InScribe or some other platform, just be mindful that how students are getting to that platform is critically important. It really needs to be integrated into the tools that they're already using. So we really designed InScribe for integration. So of course we integrate with the learning management platforms, all of them. You can do that integration at the course level. You can do that integration above the course level, so on the dashboard or at the higher level navigation. But we also will integrate into your student portal, into your websites, into your app if you have a native app. The idea is you want the community to be one click away from your students when they need it, so that they're not having to think about, how do I get there? The other thing that's really important in terms of access is making sure students know what's happening in the community rather than having to come in and check it out. So we do have a mobile app, and of course that speaks to proximity. You know, if a student has the mobile app in their back pocket, then their access point isn't even through another technology, it's right there. But it also provides us another way to get these notifications to students. So as things are happening in our community, we are letting the participants know through email, through phone notifications. Now they can control how often they're getting notifications and what they get notified about. But you can imagine if somebody posts a question and nobody knows that that question is there, it's very unlikely to get answered. But if somebody posts a question and immediately 300 members of the community get an email saying, hey, Katie asked this question, do you want to jump in and answer? How many more people are going to be willing to jump in and help? So that notification process is also really important and critical. So think about that as part of your community strategy.
Katie,
Okay.
along the same lines as notifications, we do have a question in the chat.
Great.
Do you offer a communication plan to explain to students what the digital community is and the value of it?
We do. So we've been doing this for quite some time. And so one of the, services, when we partner with somebody, we are very much invested in the launch and success of your community. So not only do we come to the table with the set of best practices, like some of the ones I've already touched on, but we also bring an entire launch plan to the table. So that includes not just, the technology launch, but how communication strategies, nurturing the community, how we think you can go about doing that, check-ins periodically to make sure that that's working. All of that you can customize, but we don't want you to have to start from scratch. So we essentially give you a packet of materials that you can then work with us to customize and facilitate the launch.
Perfect. Let's see InScribe.
Let's see it. Okay. There we go. All right. I don't know, my internet's being a little bit wonky, so bear with me. Okay, so I just wanted to start on this page because this is really the student's homepage for all their communities. It's very common for a student to have more than one community at an institution. And this highlights some of the ones that we talked about. So, maybe I have a community around college algebra. Maybe I'm in the College of Nursing and I have a program community. Maybe I was in a community before I joined the institution. If you're thinking about it, you don't have to roll out all these different types of communities at the same time. Usually we'll start in one area, but then as that community builds, I guarantee you will find other places where you could use this type of capability and technology. So this might be where the student starts, but we're going to focus here on the Student Connect community, so a peer-to-peer space. So this is really about, think about this, in this case, we're going to describe it as an institution-wide community that all students have access to and can come in to talk to each other and share ideas. And so to that end, just to kind of orient us, we're in the Student Connect community, and you can see that the community is primarily organized by topic areas. So in communities, you always want to have a balance of social spaces, hello from home, random, maybe a little bit more tactical spaces like courses and homework, apps and websites. And then you can see here, we also have this event space. So I'll talk about that as well in a few minutes. We will come to the table with recommendations for you on what topics we think you should include, but it's all customizable. We also have in our communities channels, which are subgroups that you can create in the space. So especially if you have a really big community, sometimes you'll have affinity groups that, maybe would benefit from a smaller space where they can just talk to each other. So we have an example here of student parents. Maybe I've formed a study group with a bunch of people and we have our own little space. Most of these are open, so students can join them, opt into them, but you can create private channels that nobody can see unless they're invited into that space. So when you come into the community, you're usually coming for, one of three reasons. One is that you're just curious. So you're going to browse around. That's when the topics are extremely helpful because it just gives you an organization structure. I think this is where you, again, to go back to the earlier question, you start to see some of the differences in just how the information architecture and user experience differs from a traditional discussion board and how that can really impact how people think about and use the community. So I can kind of navigate through here. Sometimes people are looking for friends, and so they'll jump in and post something. I mean, we do have people that really come in and post and say, hi, I'm looking for friends. It's very sweet, and they always get responses. And sometimes people are coming because they have a specific question. So if I really had a specific question, I'm struggling and I want to find some people to study with, I'm going to type in study group. Now I'm searching across all of the content in this space. So imagine if you just have a stream of consciousness system to try to figure out if anybody had talked about study groups is almost impossible. But here I can search for it. It's automatically going to return things that are related to study groups. I can jump in there, see that these people are forming one. Maybe I respond and say, please include me. Or they maybe have provided a link where I can go and join that group. So it's a way to ensure that the valuable knowledge that you're generating in these spaces is not lost over time. Now, not like there will not always be a conversation in the community that relates to what you need. So students can go ahead and start a new conversation. I will say that we feel like the reusability of knowledge is so important that we have actually integrated search directly into the question asking process. So if I start to type study group here, this is one of the things that Rosie will do. And she'll pop up and say, hey, I think there's some interesting things you might already want to jump in on, and just sort of nudge me in that direction. But, doesn't require me to go there. So I could post a new conversation to the community. I can add in images and videos and emojis and lots of cool things in that post. I also have a lot of agency over how I show up in the community. So this is also really important and a really important best practice. Digital communities, by their nature, welcome a larger population to participate because it's much easier to take your time, write a post, think about how you're going to post it, than it is to raise your hand in a classroom or even speak up in a live Zoom. So you're already welcoming a group of people that might have been too shy for synchronous interaction into this community for asynchronous. But that doesn't always include everybody. And so when people post in the community, we also allow them some flexibility about who can see that post. So maybe I want to post and everyone can see it. I can also post anonymously. So everyone can see my post, but they would not know it's me that posted it. Now, I will say moderators can see who that person was. So it's not absolute anonymity, but it is a little sort of layer of protection, if you will. Or I can post just to the moderators of the community. And those moderators are usually folks from your organization, in student services or student affairs for this type of space. So again, just really saying, like, how can we ensure that the most people are participating? We're maximizing that reach and access. So I'm not going to post this, but you could go ahead and post it. And then that will pop it up to the top of the conversations list. And again, all the members of the community get that notification that I talked about. And the notifications are really flexible. So students can come in and change what they're getting notified about, when, how. So we'll default to kind of letting them know what's going on. But then if they want to change that and maybe decrease the number of notifications, they can do that really easily.
Hey, Katie, we have a question.
I know, I was going to pause. Oh, that's perfect timing.
Okay, so what steps are taken to ensure that all voices are heard and respected? And how do you keep it safe for all learners?
Yeah, so there's couple of best practices, a little bit of technology, and then a little bit of just sort of implementation strategy. So one is, we always recommend, I don't have it here, maybe I do have it here. So when students first join, they get access to this onboarding workflow. And part of that workflow is going to walk them through an introduction to the community. And that's usually a short video, but it's also a place to include the community norms. So this is how we expect you to behave. If you don't behave like this, you'll be removed from the community. So it's really setting those expectations for learners that I think is very important. From an implementation standpoint, I will say that we have seen almost no examples of people actually behaving badly in the community. I think in the 6 years we've been doing this, we had 2 posts that had to be taken down. And I think part of that is because it's integrated into the tools that they're using at school, and it's not totally anonymous. Students bring a very different mentality to these spaces than what they would bring to like a Discord or a Facebook or something that's really independent of what they're doing academically. Now, with all that said, we do have some technology safeguards. So one of the other things that Rosie does is let me see if I have an example here. Looks through the post, one for keywords. So if a bad word shows up or if some string of words shows up, she can identify that and let you know. But she also looks at the sentiment of the post. So if the sentiment shows a lot of sadness, frustration, anger, she can actually pick up on that and will alert the moderators. So this flag was done by Rosie. It's not visible to the student, but it's a way to say to your team at the institution, hey, I think there's a post you want to go in and pay attention to. Now, as I said, the number of posts that are actually like inappropriate are very, very low, but we do sometimes have students come in and say, I'm at my wit's end. I've been trying to get a hold of somebody for 3 days and I can't get through. And so it's also really important to know that, right? There's a student who's kind of at their breaking point and all they really need is for somebody to reach out and help them. And you may never have known that if they hadn't said something in the community space. So it can be really valuable from that perspective as well.
Let's talk about privacy. So what measures are in place to protect the privacy and security of both faculty and student data?
So at the data level, all the data is encrypted at rest and in transit. So we take the storage and communication of data very, very seriously. There's a long conversation we can have about the security policies that we do from a technology standpoint, which is probably a different webinar, but reach out if you want the details of that. And then within the platform, a couple of things. One, you can't get into a community unless you have school credentials to get in, or the school has provided you some other mechanism to get in. So we use your login to access the space. The student, we don't store any passwords on our side. So that helps ensure that we're keeping the community to the community that you are focusing on. Students also, of course, are not required to post in the community. So it's really their agency about whether they want to participate, and they can control how they appear. So you can come in, you can modify your image, you can change your username. You can actually, as an institution, default this to just initials. So you wouldn't actually know the student's name unless they wanted you to. And your information here in terms of email address, name, that is never visible to your peers. So only the administrators of the community can see it. So we take that very seriously. We also are GDPR compliant. We have, tools that we can use for that kind of opt-in when the students come into the platform. But if you have further questions about that, let me know, because I know it's a broad category.
Did you touch on like the typical role of a moderator? Like, is that a faculty member? Is that a TA? What does that typically look like in
I
these
did
two?
not. Thank you for asking. So moderators depend a little bit on what type of community you're launching. So in a peer community like this, what's interesting is less is more. And what I mean by that is if you have an active moderator in a peer community, they might actually stifle the student voices and they're less likely to persist. So in a peer community, an institutional moderator is probably coming from your advisory group, your student services, or your student success organization. And they're kind of just lurking in the background, seeing what's going on, making sure issues are getting resolved, just stepping in if necessary. You can also empower your students. So if you have student leadership groups, they're great resources to tap into and empower for moderator roles in these type of spaces. If you're in an academic or learning community, you're building something, let's say around college algebra, then your moderators are more active and they tend to be faculty, TAs, the tutoring center, people that are already doing that type of support. This just gives them a more scalable space to do that.
All right, I'm going to do a quick time check. We got about 9 minutes. We
Okay.
have another question in the chat. We have an audience member that would like to see what the mobile platform looks like.
Okay, I think we have to follow up on that because I didn't set it up to demo and that'll take me like 9 minutes to even figure out now.
All right, let's do charging ahead. I will reach out to the
Grab
audience.
their name and we can figure out how to set that up for you. It's a good point though. I should generally have that ready to go. Anything else in the Q&A for now?
Nope.
Okay, awesome. So I know we don't have a ton of time, so I'm gonna jump through a few things really quickly. We talked about conversations. I think we covered the majority of stuff there. A lot of the technology you'd expect, like you can follow a conversation, you can endorse a post if a student gives a really great answer and it'll put a little icon on it. We have a resources area. So if you have supplemental content, articles, videos that you want to put in your community, you can do it here. This is also kind of a neat way that our platform differs from some platforms that are really focused just on discussion, because we think about content in lots of different ways: conversations, resources, and this what we call live events area. So live events are really just that. It's a way to bring synchronous engagement and conversation into what is otherwise an asynchronous space. So you can schedule a live event, give it a date and time. People would use this for, you saw probably some examples on that page of study groups, but people might also use this for a guest speaker or, we're going to do a career planning event. And so it gives your learners a way to get in. You can use any tool that you want. So if you're a Zoom school or a team school, you can use whatever platform you're already using. And if you record that session, you can then bring it back and post it to the InScribe community. So students who weren't able to participate can then watch, and feel like they didn't miss out. We think it's really neat in communities to be able to have this integration of asynchronous and synchronous opportunities, especially for these students who, really need that flexibility, but might benefit from something face-to-face. All right, really quickly, and you'll just interrupt me if you need to. Where am I going? I just want to touch on the data side of things as well. Because of how my team grew up, I didn't really tell you about our origin story, but we've been working with online students and programs for about 25 years, not at this company, but in our previous life and then at this company. And one of the things that we are very sensitive to is how important the data that we're generating is to the institution. So we do not hold your data hostage. We have lots of ways to access that information and maybe combine it with data at your school. And we want to meet you, wherever you need us to be. So in the community admin area, you can see, all the list of students or participants in your community. You can go in and see an individual and what they've done. I'll just touch really quickly. This is the reputation system. So students can earn points as they participate in the community. And one of the things that I think is really cool about our approach to reputation and gaming is that it's not just about people who are posting in the community, but it's also about people who are consuming that content. So if you're a lurker and you never post anything and you never like respond to anybody's post, that doesn't mean that you're not a good community member, and it doesn't mean that you're not getting something really important and beneficial out of that community. So we really honor people for that type of activity as well. But you can see all of what Jennifer's done here. You can click on individuals. We also have analytics built into the platform. So at the community level, you can see what people have been doing, where they've been posting, how active they've been, and you can export all of this data through spreadsheet based on whatever time frame you want. Now, you also can have these reports at the organizational level. So across all of your communities, you can see the same data. And if you really want to go deep, we have learning event level data, which is super granular that we're tracking, and we can give you access to that through export or API. We don't put it in the platform because it's a huge data set. But if you want it and that's interesting to you, we can absolutely make that available to you.
Katie, we have a couple of audience members that would like to hear more about ADA compliance. For instance, screen readers, how does that work? And maybe VPAT as well.
Yeah, so we do have a VPAT, which we're happy to share. We just updated it at the beginning of this year. And I don't have the specific reader list, but that can also be provided to you. So we follow the WCAG AA standards. We validate our platform against those standards every year. And, we build it in as we go. So it's not like we're waiting at once a year and then fixing everything. I mentioned we've been doing this for a long time. So we really understand the importance of those standards and how to work them into the technology as we go. But we also check ourselves once a year, and any gaps that we find, our goal is to have those remediated within the next quarter. But if you find something, you can bring it to us and we'll make sure that it gets prioritized.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. So I know we only have a few minutes left. I'm just going to kind of wrap up. This was such a high level whirlwind conversation about the platform. We obviously can go a lot deeper. I really believe if this is something you're thinking about, it can be really beneficial to set up a direct demo, because then we can really think about your specific use case and talk about the platform and capabilities with regard to what your goals are and what you're hoping to achieve. So don't hesitate to reach out if you want to do a quick, it doesn't have to be long demo where we kind of dig into that with you. Other than that, you can reach out to me. LinkedIn is a great way to reach out to me, or any of the